I'm sorry, these for us or just for?
No.
All right, we'll call this meeting of the Facilities and Technology Committee to order at 6:04 p.m. And tonight we have one agenda item and one only, and it's next steps for the building project. We have Chris Likely from CSG here. If you'd like to join us at the table when you are ready, feel free. Is there someone who would like to approve the agenda? Okay, thank you, Jen. Second? All in favor? Motion passes. The agenda is approved.
Aye.
Thank you, John. All right. So when you're ready, Mr. Cycli, we'll open it up to you. Unless, Dr. Macri, do you want to begin?
Nope.
Okay.
At the podium just so we can hear him. What would be better?
Doesn't make a difference. You'd be heard anywhere.
Oh, wherever you want to sit.
It'll-
I'll do it for you.
Let me know and I'll advance it. Make sure your mic is on.
Yeah, how about now? Good?
Just put a little closer. The masks are really a detriment.
Yeah.
You can take your mask off if you're up there. Right?
Well, we're not supposed to in school, so
Oh.
we're not supposed to
Can you
yet.
pull it down in front of there?
Oh,
my.
Believe me, I can't wait either, but we got to follow the rules.
yeah, I know. All right, that's okay. I could talk loud. So, this is a follow-up. Good evening. This is a follow-up to the last time we were here. What I've done tonight is outlined the process from now, essentially until June of 2022, when we would tentatively submit a grant application. That's the due date, June 30th, to submit any priority list building project. And then I've got a recap of a little bit of what we did for existing conditions, because that's about the only thing that remains usable from, I'll call it phase one, or the first part of this study was the existing building conditions. So I have a recap of Edna Stevens, just to show you what we did. I have a recap of the middle school and a little bit of the program of what the final option was in terms of that project. And then I have a cost slide in there to show you what the cost of the middle school would be. And I only did the middle school because it appears that that's going to be the project that would move forward this time. So if that's wrong, correct me. I could certainly speak to it. I just don't have a slide for it.
So just quickly, to update the committee, I did speak to quite a few people, and we talked about this at the last meeting as well. Really thinking and looking at what the district is missing, and our middle school, besides the fact that operationally it's not functional at all and it's falling apart like a Tommy's face, programmatically it's not anywhere near where it should be for 2021. So as I stated before, I truly believe that the best return of investment would be to start with the middle school. We could talk more as the project progresses, but I would like to have a STEAM focus, which is science, technology, engineering, the arts, and mathematics. We have an incredibly gifted performing arts staff at CMS right now, and same with STEM, and they're not being utilized to their capacity. We are halfway there. We could do so much for the students of Cromwell if we took a slightly different path. So it is really my recommendation that we move forward with a comprehensive study for CMS. We did that for ECS. We did not do a complete comprehensive for CMS. And it would obviously be my recommendation to the community that this would be in the best interest, and maybe 2 to 3 years following with ECS. So that's why when I spoke to Chris, I did ask him, we have a lot of information on ECS. It's old. However, we don't have ed specs for CMS. So go ahead, Mr. Cycli.
Can I just make sure there are no questions before we go on from anyone on the committee? Okay.
Next. Okay, so starting with where we are right now, what this committee or the Board of Ed would need to do to start off would be to review the needs of the middle school, recommend action to the Town Council and the Board of Finance, and then ultimately have the Board of Finance and Town Council say, okay, you can now start this process, which would be very similar to this presentation. There'd be a little bit more detail, but essentially they would agree to be on board with moving forward. There'll be some ancillary costs that we'll get into in a little bit, or actually at the end of this presentation, but that will essentially get you through the point of taking a building project to a grant application in June. Okay. So then, assuming that's May, June-ish, depending on schedules right now, not really sure. I gave it a little bit of time. Starting in July, could be a little bit sooner, but we would issue an RFP for the owner's rep. I know there is a balance on our contract. However, I think it would just be cleaner if that kind of went away and we just went out with a new RFP for that service, because it would essentially be starting all over again with just the middle school this time, not a study of the two buildings and then Edna Stevens. So it just makes things a little bit cleaner from a housekeeping issue. So that would be, so in July, the Town Council would form a building committee. They could appoint this facilities committee as the interim building committee for the grant application process. That is a possibility. And this committee could also, should the referendum pass, whenever it's scheduled, this committee could then also fulfill that role as building committee for the rest of the building project. So there are those options as well. And then we would also issue an RFP, our request for qualification, request for proposal for architectural services specific to the middle school. So what we had the last time, back in 2016, was the feasibility study for both schools, and then the assumption that out of that, a grant application would be submitted. So that piece is already done. That was DRA the last time who did all that. They did the feasibility study, and they essentially finished with the Edna Stevens information. And then we would start to roll into schematic design and all of the paperwork that would be required for the grant application from July until May, essentially, before it's wrapped up and put together in June to be submitted. Next slide. Okay, so this gets into a little bit, now we're into a little bit more detail. So in January, once we have consultants on board, we'll develop the schematic design, and we'll also have to prepare an estimate. Now, an estimate will be good for several reasons. One, it'll be a more detailed estimate for the Board of Finance and Town Council to be able to feel comfortable approving. But we also need a significant level of detail for the estimate for the grant application that gets submitted in June. So those are the two things that would start somewhere late December, early January, kind of roll into February and March. That process will be complete in March, right at the time when we would need, again, Board of Finance and Town Council to ultimately set a referendum date. Now, the dates that I picked in here were if we had a referendum date that coincides with your budget referendum. That may or may not work. This whole schedule is completely up for discussion and adjustment, but I had to make some assumptions just to be able to present a timeline to be able to get to June. The one caveat with the referendum is that the state does allow you to submit the grant application in June with a commitment that you will hold a referendum, if you need one, by November, by the general election date, November, whatever it is, 3rd. So you do have that ability. It kind of goes into a holding pattern in the state's website. So in March, they set referendum date of, I just picked May 2nd. So now if you go, so this form right here on the right was just some detail to kind of work through some of the costs we did for Edna Stevens. I left this in here because it's got some relevant information, even though it's not necessarily pertinent to the middle school. It would be the same level of detail. It would just have some slightly different figures in it. So we do get into detail when we talk about town share, ultimate town share, what the state's reimbursement cost would be. And again, I'll show you that later in the budget slide because there is a couple of different scenarios. So next. So now just a couple of important pieces along the way. So in December, again, I just kind of put in here, we'd update town council on the process, sequence of events. That is really town council, board of finance, any of the other boards that need to be brought up to speed. We'll start to schedule those, let them know what's going on. Essentially be as transparent as possible and provide as much information to everyone before that March date where they've essentially got to, if they were to set the referendum with the budget, we want them to be as knowledgeable and prepared as possible going into that decision in March. So in January, right, we'd recommend appropriation and bring to the Finance Committee for approval for a majority vote. February, we'd take it through a preliminary planning and zoning. I believe that is a requirement as part of the charter as well to take it through plan approval. And then again in March, Town Council, Board of Finance, they would set the special town meeting and then go forward with a referendum. Next slide. So then in April, assuming, again, we're still going along that path, we would need town council to approve. There's resolutions that we need to go along with the grant application. We'll have one of them ahead of time. That would be the establishment of the building committee, the very first one on the left. And then the other two are authorizing the preparation of schematic drawings, outline specifications, and an estimate to be submitted for a project, and then allowing the superintendent to submit the grant application to the state. So those are the other three main resolutions we need from the town council. And then ultimately, again in April, we have collecting the meeting minutes from that referendum or town meeting, whichever it may be, if it happens in April. It could go to May. Obviously, it could go to the very beginning of June. We just need to make sure that we have enough time to collect the certified information, copies of the votes, things like that, to be able to submit with the application by June 30th. So, and that's the dark blue box on the right. So, I know there's kind of a lot of information there, but that's the process that we kind of need to hit going along the way to get to June 30th of 2022. We do have some time. It's not overwhelming right now, but we're very quickly going to run out of time if this starts to, if we're in July and we're still kind of at this same place, we're gonna run into, it's gonna be a busy summer.
So I just want to interrupt Chris for a minute. That's my exact worry, is that we'll run out of time, and that has been the case the last couple of times. So I have spoken to Mayor Fianza. He completely supports this process. He's happy that we're going to move forward with CMS first. He also believes we should do ECS as well, but go with CMS first. We spoke a little bit about the debt that the town is in. I talked to him about that. I also spoke to Mary Ann Sylvester and Tony Salvatore, and I looked at the how much Cromwell is in debt and when things will start coming off of bonding. So it looks like if we started like Chris is proposing, and I believe we should, we would be able to really, I guess it's the cash flow piece, like when are we going to see the greatest expenses? And in speaking with Chris, it's 24, 25.
24, 25, correct.
Right.
When you would see your biggest expenses come in.
So the town, as of now, when you're looking at the bonding and what's on bond and what's coming off, is in a very good position to be able to take on a new building project for even the year before, but a year later is even better. So it's time to do this. So we have to make a decision to actually move forward and do it, or wait another 10 years because this is a lot of work, as everybody knows, and we want to make sure that we follow through this time and keep all stakeholders involved. What we did previously was have a tri-board meeting, which was the Board of Ed, the Board of Finance, the Town Council. I do believe we might want to take a slightly different approach and present information to the Board of Finance and to the Town Council a little separately, perhaps, so they have the opportunity to ask more questions and then do it more often, so that they are getting all their questions answered as we move along in the process. I think that'll be more effective. No one will feel that this is a surprise, and we should be prepared and ready to submit the grant on June 30th of 22. So I have spoken to town officials just so I could feel where the budget, where we are as far as finances in town, and when they feel that we could take on another project. Of course, it would have to go through, well, we don't know for sure. As Chris mentioned, if it goes to the town committee, they vote on it, it could possibly just skip over the referendum component. But if we end up going to referendum, Chris is right, it's around, I think this year was May 4th, so it would be, I think it's the same every year. So we would be spot on and ready to get something done this time for our kids.
Right.
I don't know if you have any questions for me as far as that, or Chris can go on.
Any other questions on the timeline? Next. So now a little bit of the background of what we did the last time. So Edna Stevens, this is a layout of the existing building. So what they did, they went through and they measured both buildings. I started with Edna Stevens. They did a layout showing where all the classrooms were. The study took it a little bit further, and if you go to the next slide, came up with just some issues that the building itself was facing. This was also related to the program at the time, what they were trying to achieve. So obviously we know the age, the code compliance, the ADA compliance issues in the building, corridor widths, and then security. Those were some of the main factors with that particular facility. Educationally, classroom size, conformity, kindergarten, the classroom environment, which I believe has changed since this was completed, and then the location of the early childhood education program. So that was a big component to that program when we did this several years ago. So I'm not sure if that's still something that is being considered, but.
So we definitely, if you walk through ECS and you're going into preschool, we definitely want to take a look at it in the future, but we've made some changes that when you look at it, it's fine for now. We definitely want to move forward within a few years, but it's not as, it's actually pretty functional as far as I'm concerned. I'm sure some people may not feel that way, but it is, and there are some things that we could possibly do to keep it going for a little bit longer. There is air conditioning in almost every area except for a few, and Tommy could speak of that. And obviously our ventilation is much better because of COVID. So we were forced, which if you could look for the silver lining in COVID, we were forced to do some things under the environment to begin with because of COVID. So I feel that we could put the ECS off for a little bit longer, operationally and educationally, because CMS definitely needs a big programmatic change, and it's falling apart.
Right. So again, I probably should have pointed out before I started this, but this study was published in 2016. So again, there's been a lot of changes, and well, I know in ECS, I'm not sure if they were as significant in the middle school from then till now, but these are just the finding. This was kind of the major pieces that came out of the report from 2016. So next slide. So ultimately, the option that was selected was to build a new building on the same site as the current building, The white shaded building is the new building, and the outline with the light gray shade is the existing building. So as you can see, they were going to be pretty close, but then ultimately the existing building would have been knocked down for the rest of the site to be completed, the rest of the bus loop and so on. So this essentially was the end of that study, and then that's what was decided sometime around 2017 to move forward with this option, these costs. Ed specs were developed around, again, the white shaded building, and that's what we took forward. So if you go to the next slide, now we start with the middle school. So again, part of this same study, they went through, they measured the entire existing building. We've got all the classroom sizes, the science sizes, and through that program, they were looking to increase science labs at least by adding prep rooms, adding a couple hundred square feet, 200 to 300 square feet to each science room. So next slide. Issues with the facility again in 2016, its age, the code compliance, technology upgrades. I'm not sure if that was done or to what extent. Modulars, I believe, are still there, right? Educationally, again, classroom size we know is small. It's very tight. The environment, I'm not sure if that's been improved because of COVID or whatever. Media center and the computer lab, those are some issues at the time. The science classrooms, as I said, are just small. And the STEM program at the time was taught in the home economics space. Probably still the same way. So next slide. So relative to the middle school, some of the programming that came out, they were looking for classrooms for grades 6 through 8 to be 850 square feet. We're trying to achieve science rooms, the CLABs they call them, classroom lab kind of combination spaces, to be at 1,200 square feet each, not including prep rooms, but being able to add prep rooms. One of the other things that this program, so I know this is really hard to read, but it's hard to really show, and I'm not quite sure how relative it is right now. But again, we're all aware that the gym and locker room area is significant in this building, as is the auditorium. So the gym and locker room area combined is 10,000 square feet, and the auditorium with the stage and the storage, everything that it would encompass an auditorium, is 5,300 square feet. So this program kept those spaces. So then we took it a step further recently after we met with the superintendent. Based on the current enrollment projection that we have, 2022 is your peak of the 8-year enrollment at 481 students. Based on the state's allowable square footage calculation, that would mean you're allowed 80,808 square feet. It's currently 83,060 square feet. That's the size of the current facility. And this program at the time was up to 84,820. So it was definitely over the allowable, especially at that time because the enrollment was lower. But it's over even the existing square footage. So next slide. So the option that was selected for this, again in 2016, was just to expand the classroom wing and new science labs. The new science labs are going to be the 4 on the left, and then there was a classroom wing on the right. That's it. It was not to touch or kind of go through and upgrade the rest of the building at all. They decided that they just wanted to keep this very simple to try and correct to right size, I should say, some of the classroom spaces and fix the science labs. Next slide. Okay, so here's where we get into the options. If we were to renovate the entire existing middle school as it sits right now at 83,000 square feet and not make any adjustments, not add any square footage, reduce any square footage, the state uses $450 per square foot as a target for that. So the $450 a square foot would equate to a $37,400,000 project, thereabout. Okay, doesn't take into account any programming, anything. It's pure square footage numbers. Your current reimbursement rate for 2021 is 49.64%. That will carry through till June 30th. So as long as the referendum is held before June 30th, that will be your reimbursement rate. Now, as I said before, the state does allow you to hold a referendum later in September, October, November. If that's the case, you would be subject to the new reimbursement rate, which is not published yet for 22. That takes effect July 1st. So it's not the grant application that governs your reimbursement rate. It's when your funding gets approved. So there's a big stipulation there. So if it were submitted now, the current town share would be about 18.9 million. Again, thereabouts. However, what this also represents, being that we're 3,000 square feet over the allowable square footage, there's a separate calculation, and as we get into this, the rest of this process, should this move forward, you'll see those documents and how those values are arrived. But because you're over your square footage, your allowable square footage, there's a further calculation that then reduces your overall reimbursement rate. So you lose about 3/4 of a percentage point because you're 3,000 square feet over. So with that, with the reduction of the reimbursement rate from 49.64 to 48.29, the town share increases by $500,000. So instead of 18.9, it would be 19.4 out of the 37.4. So the 19.4 would be the amount that we would work with the finance department to ultimately, when the project is complete, that's what would be on the town's debt service. Okay. So now, if you were to build a new building, get rid of the old building, you're at the 80,080 square feet. That's your maximum allowable, again, for the states. You don't take any reimbursement rate reduction because you stick to the 80,000 square feet. At $600 a square foot, because it's a new building, plus demolition of the existing building, you're looking at about a $48.5 million project. Now that has a lower reimbursement rate because it's a new building. So that reimbursement rate is 39.64%. So the town share then jumps to 29.3 million if you were to build a new building. So again, I mean, this was the information that I presented to the superintendent so she could have some further conversations with the finance department, the mayor, the selectman's office. Obviously, there's variations here, right? The ultimate goal may not be to renovate the entire building. So we wouldn't be touching all 83,000 square feet. That was the outcome of the study in 2016, was to not do all 80,000 square feet and to do 20,000 square feet, I think, or something like that combined in the two, and then some ancillary areas, which would ultimately reduce the cost. So, go ahead.
Question. So say they decide to do some portion less than the entire building. How does that work with the mechanicals? Because that's an old steam plant, and you're probably not replacing it with a steam plant. So the areas that are run by steam, how does that, how does that work into the rest of the building? Because you can't have both.
Right.
So you're going to have to touch every area, but not necessarily renovate every area. But you have to do something in every area.
Correct. Yeah, they would have to. Right, they would have to look at that and figure it out. Either take the steam system offline altogether, and go with air handlers, or cut it off wherever they would plan to do new work, and then just service that new area with new equipment.
I'm just thinking how the building's built. I don't know if that's a feasible option. That's all.
Yeah. There was an MEP narrative or a mechanical narrative done in 2016. They did look at that. Again, it was just for those two wings that were adjacent at each end of the building. I don't know how they were planning to solve for that. The narrative didn't really get into that. But if that were the case, we would have to look at that, and obviously it would be some cost less than this, but slightly elevated to capture whatever mechanical needs the overall building would need. So, but again, without really knowing what the appetite is, what the program's going to be, I know there's a desire to keep the auditorium and the gym, which would really lend itself to renovating the existing building. And at that cost, it would appear that doing the entire 83,000 square feet, or even slightly over, would still be beneficial to the building and to the town and to the students. But again, those are, further conversations that we all need to have. But I did this kind of as a quick outline to give you an idea of the different options, the different costs. And that's kind of, without locking it into those numbers, that's kind of the ceiling. So we kind of know that this isn't going to be more than a $48 million project. It's, if we renovated the entire building, it's probably not going to be more than a $37 million project. It'll probably be, it could be slightly less, give or take. But, so there's a lot of variation to be had within this. But at least this starts the conversation. If you have an appetite for this, then we can talk further. So again, I just put in yellow that it's just for presentation purpose because they're really high level numbers right now. And then in terms of anticipated pre-referendum costs, I know I gave the superintendent a value yesterday of 30 to 50,000. However, after thinking about it a little bit more, I'd rather be a little bit conservative and say 50 to 70 right now. We will need an architect. You're probably going to want an OPM, and you will definitely need an estimate. So there are 3 components there that will have some costs.
What does OPN stand for?
Owner's project manager, or owner's representative. Essentially what we as CSG are currently to the district.
Can I just back up to the new building for a quick second? I know at ACS we had a plan sort of for where the new building would go. Was that looked at all for CMS when we thought about a new building, where it would be placed or how that could work?
Yes, but no. The completely replacing the existing middle school was never really considered. It was always, what can we do to just kind of get by, to right size the classrooms. That was kind of the direction at the time that DRA was given. Nothing that I really found had anything to do with a layout of a new building.
If we were to go the renovation route, like what are we missing by going that route, Like what aren't we getting from just renovating? Does that make sense? Do you know what I'm saying?
You kind of said the same thing. What do you mean, what are we missing?
There was the whole list of things that we needed at CMS that we don't have, right? Like bigger classroom sizes, labs.
Correct.
Bigger,
Yeah.
that whole kind of list. So if we don't go the new building route and we just renovate, is there anything we're not going to cover with that?
Well, I mean, that's hard to say right now, but architecturally speaking, and I'm not an architect, there may be some inefficiencies that you're losing, or some efficiencies, I should say, that you're losing with the existing building versus gaining in a new building with a new layout.
So,
Without really knowing what a program might be or how it would work, or really even knowing how the building operates, it's kind of hard to say at this point. But off the top, I would say that's probably the biggest challenge would be the building efficiency. I don't know how the existing building works, but a new layout, if it could be stacked, condensed, you could just gain some things there and still have the same program.
So Jen, because in having this conversation, saving the auditorium, the gym, and all of that, because we'll never see that size again unless the town wants to kick in that extra, because it's not reimbursable for a middle school. That used to be a high school. So we had the same problem in the last district I worked in. And as far as having a gymnasium that size, an auditorium that size, we won't see that without more. We could see it if the town wanted to take on more of the expenses. So trying to save those areas is something I would like to try to do, but that may not be feasible because we really have to look at these sketches are, this was great for what they were trying to accomplish in 2016. But what I would like to accomplish as far as developing a STEAM related school, it would probably look different. And so, for example, look at the STEM room right now. The STEM room is.
Can you go back 2 slides?
Sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah.
We might as well. Right there. Oh,
Right there.
Yep.
So, really, that when you look at the
Or
that
you
that
want to go
looks
back
like,
one more?
no, this one's good.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So if you look at this right here, this drawing, you're looking at the STEM in the bottom left-hand corner. The program, really, we want to make the library. We want to make that the library media center. We want our STEM programming, our arts programming to be obviously we have to teach everything like we're still a Connecticut school. We have to meet all standards, but we want to teach a lot of the standards through the STEAM programming. So that becomes more of the focal point of the school. So I don't see it looking like this really at all. So we have to really think, what are we going to trade off? So what would be the trade-off? If we decided to go with a new building, which makes sense as well, we just have to know that it would probably be much more efficient operationally, but that we would be giving up all those areas that will never be of that size unless the town decided that they would go with the larger building, which isn't very common to happen because it's just more of an expense, less reimbursement. Right. So I'm open to whatever the community wants, but in the end, this schematic is probably not going to work for what I'm envisioning for the middle school.
And that could change, right? I mean, this was in the past, but maybe we choose another wing or.
Exactly. I just wanted to kind of do this after tonight. You're probably never going to see these again unless whatever architect comes on board to do this wants to look at some of the information that was completed.
Right. And they may say, whoever that architect is, may say, well, that's going to be this much more expensive, and come back to this plan, and we have to really use this as a starting point, and then talk about what our programmatic, what we really want to look, what do we want our students to learn, and be able to do. What are the pathways we want our kids to have at the middle school? And then we may say we can't afford that, and have to scale back a little, and
that'll be all part of the process that's going to start hopefully soon. So the architect I don't want you to think tonight that you're deciding renovating the building versus new building. That's definitely not the decision that's going to happen. That's something that will be flushed out during the architect's programming process. They'll come up, they'll look at the existing building, they'll come up with their own layouts and say, okay, this is kind of what we're looking at based on the programmatic changes within the building, if there are additions. Now, again, as I mentioned, there was an addition here, and I think they were adding about 1,500 square feet to this building. I think that the program where they left it was about 85,000, so, or 84 and change, something like that. So they were adding on to it. So that reimbursement rate would dip ultimately a little bit more, up into probably 20 million, somewhere in there. But that was what they decided to do at the time. That whole process will start all over again with an architect this time around. There'll be programming meetings. They'll sit with all the department heads, superintendent's administration, and so on, and essentially go through all that work all over again, but instead of Edna Stevens, for the middle school.
I'm sorry. is Ann Cochiola on the phone?
Yes, I am.
Okay,
Hello,
I thought she was
everyone.
there, yeah. So I'm sorry, I did invite Ann to join us tonight, so since she is the principal of CMS, so she can hear about an update about the discussions that we've been having. So, Ms. Coach, if you do you have any questions or anything that you're wondering about, go ahead and ask, because obviously, as the principal of the school, she'll be running the show with Tommy, so. And I'm there too, so I'll be right there with you, driving you all crazy.
Yeah. Certainly to go with the STEAM venue would be a lovely, avenue for our middle school. But I also see where, just to add in my 2 cents, our auditorium is pretty well utilized, because we do, before COVID hit, had a pretty robust drama program, and that auditorium was filled. So, it would be something I'd hate to see lose, and that connects in with the arts. And then our gym is used by the community alike every night, again, pre-COVID. So, there's certainly 2 places that are well utilized when we're all back up and, running. But I definitely see where we would also have to look at other programs like our counseling program. We need an area that's a little more confidential. So I can go on and on, but
Right, confidential and more than 6 feet. Social distancing, because we had to quarantine a lot, because it's
Right.
the office space
Right.
is very small at the middle school.
and would love to see a common space for our middle school kids. So when kids do projects or, things, that they have a space that they can go to work in. That's pretty common in, updated middle schools. So it's, getting all that sort of resource in for our kids to, do an expanded learning.
Right, and again, I can't stress enough that all
I
of
could
those-
go on.
No, we feel the same way, and in speaking with Chris, he understands. Like, we want to make sure that we have enough space for inquiry-based project learning, and we want to make sure that there's enough for student voice and choice, because right now the kids, obviously, we couldn't even, Miss Cochiola and Miss Lynch and everyone did a great job with keeping the kids as socially distant as possible. But in this situation, you're able to tell just how little space you actually have. So it's not conducive to learning for the 21st century, really, at all. And our teachers are doing a phenomenal job, but it's time to really update and do something a little bit differently.
And again, if the existing building was utilized again, and that square footage number changes, as long as everyone is in agreement that if it continues to stay above that $80,000 based on the enrollment, 80,000 square feet based on the enrollment, it's just going to affect the reimbursement rate. So there are there are changes. We're not locked into any particular square footage. You just have to be mindful that the cost to the town will be slightly more for a bigger building. So if you, for instance, want to change some of the efficiencies in the existing building, but you want to keep the gymnasium and the auditorium, those kind of go hand in hand. Then you know that you're probably going to right size the classrooms, which you already know are small. You're going to have to put on an addition. So that's really the understanding about reusing the existing building, is that given those 2 areas are so big and are used heavily by the community, if you are going to maintain them and continue for the next 20 years, it's just going to cost a little bit more. But still, as you can see, less than building a brand new building. So, and the reimbursement rate is designed that way from the state. They want you to reutilize your existing buildings as much as possible. That's why the reimbursement rate is less for a new building. They try to discourage that, unless where, ultimately the building is just to the point where you need a new one.
Will a existing building with the renovations, will it run as efficient going back what Tommy was referring to with like for HVAC and electrical,
We're so far away from that.
would that
I mean,
typically, does that typically happen?
Yes, ultimately, yes. When the projects that we're on, when it's a complete building renovation, yes, everything at that point has to be brought up
Now-
to a 20-year life cycle.
Do you guys have an existing project or recent project that's relatively similar to this that's within a certain amount of distance that we could know about, or just trying to get some information as how that went, as far as how they felt with the renovation at the end of the project, as opposed to, how everything worked out, just to
Sure.
have.
Yeah.
I'm not saying like a reference. I'm
Yep.
just more just so we can see how that turned out.
Sure. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yep. Yeah, we could certainly take
These
you
new
to-
buildings are great, obviously.
Right.
I've worked on a few new buildings and
Mhm.
they're fantastic, but those are the questions, typical.
Yeah. Yep. Sure. Absolutely. We could do that. We could set those up.
Thank you.
Can I clarify something? So when you're saying that 85,000 square feet, so if we don't do any work on that, they're not just taking the work that we're doing and looking at that square footage. They're looking at the whole square footage of the building for our reimbursement rate. Correct? Does that make sense?
If you were to do a full renovate as new on the entire building,
So
yes.
if we didn't and we just renovated some, are they still going to take the square footage from the auditorium and the gym, or
that would
Do you know what I'm saying?
play a part in your reimbursement rate still, yes.
so it's still going to go down because we'll
Yes.
be okay.
because you're technically expanding the building beyond what they would allow. However, your overall project cost would be significantly less because you're only doing one or two small areas.
No, I don't think so, no. But I did have conversations with all of them, yeah. Does that make sense, Lindsay? I know it's hard to process, but eventually, yeah, it makes sense, okay?
Yeah.
Don't worry, I've clarified it like 25,000 times in my head, so don't feel badly.
It can be a little tricky. There's definitely some nuances within this, but please feel free to ask questions.
Are there any other questions? John, are you on the line? Do you have any questions? Haven't heard from you yet.
Yes, I'm on the line. And let me make sure that I understand what you're saying. You're perceiving that the next step would be to have an architect meet with the relevant people and help design either a new building or a renovation that would accomplish what we expect to do pedagogically. Yes?
Correct.
So we're not making a decision about a new building or a renovated building now. We're making the decision to ask somebody who knows what they're talking about to tell us how what we need to do can be done.
Exactly.
Correct. Yes. The intent is, from what I understand, is that the Board of Ed would recommend taking the middle school to the next step of hiring an architect, getting an estimate, and going through the motions with Town Council and Board of Finance to ultimately have a funding approved for a project to be submitted by June 30th of next year. If that appetite is there, then we would take the next step to move forward.
So do we need to vote on moving forward?
So
or
not at facilities, right? So
Okay,
we'll
so-
bring it to the full board meeting tonight.
okay.
And Mr. Cycli will explain again, and we'll hopefully amend our agenda to take the vote tonight.
Okay.
If it goes in that direction.
Is it in there?
We need to amend it, I think. to
Oh.
include it.
So let me, one more question.
Sure.
Logistically, does this committee need to take a vote to recommend to the whole board that we go forward to the next step, or does it just get presented and because the whole board isn't going to have all the information that we have, they're counting on us to look at stuff and make it and digest it for them.
I got question based on what John's saying. Is Chris, right? Are you sticking around for the board meeting? If we can do something at the beginning of the board meeting to change I haven't seen the agenda, I don't have it with me, the agenda, so we can, accommodate Chris speaking early on this, so we can, we did already? Then I think that would be all we need.
My understanding was that I was going to make this presentation again for
Right,
the full
okay,
board.
that was my question,
Right.
just not to have you sit here all for 3 hours
Thank
while
you.
we're.
And then go into an hour spiel.
All right. If you're gonna go through the whole thing again, then I don't think we need a motion.
Correct.
So fine, I'll shut up.
Thank you, John. Jen?
Do we, to John's point, sorry, do we need to like all be on the same page in terms of we're all on board with CMS, or it's okay if we're not, like, you know what I mean?
I think it'd be helpful, so
Yeah,
if there,
right.
if
So
there is
should
any
we-
You
opposition
actually
or
have
questions.
to be.
You're right. So
In
are we all
order-
on board with CMS?
No, we don't have to take a vote, but it's
No.
everyone,
Yeah.
Right.
well, yes, and also going forward
And
with.
go- Yeah.
Me personally, I don't know enough about the condition of each school. I think that's something Tommy and Dr. Mackey can talk on.
I'll take
They're
both.
one worse than the other.
I'll take both, so
They're both
whatever you
in bad
decide is fine with me.
Yeah. That's why I looked at CMS again, because structurally, operationally, all of that, they're not in great shape. We definitely need both, but we can't do both, at the same time. So when you look at programmatically, where we feel we'll get, like I said, the best return of investment and do what we need to do for our students and the community, to me, it makes more sense, and that's my recommendation to all of you. You obviously can have your own opinion, and we can have a discussion, but that's my recommendation to the board programmatically.
John, were you about to interject?
I was going to say our agenda doesn't say anything about action. So we couldn't, for example, do a resolution. You could certainly do a straw poll amongst the members.
You mean for this meeting, you mean for facilities, correct?
Right. So this committee couldn't report a recommendation to go forward. We can do the report and say that we all think it's a good idea individually or whatever, but the committee agenda doesn't have action on it. So I'm not sure we could do a resolution
Right. We just wanted to make sure there weren't any
legally.
strong opposition to it, wasn't any strong
Yeah.
opposition to the whole
So,
idea.
I think Godspeed. Go forward.
All right. So,
It makes sense.
all right. And looking at the clock, we should probably move on. Are there any last questions before we adjourn? Okay. Is there a motion to adjourn? Thanks, Lindsay. Second? Lou? All in favor?